access to sin is pretty easy to get into, but the good news is, and where I find hope, is that if you just seek it out, God will always give you a pathway to righteousness. What's up, guys? Today's devotional is going to be coming from Daniel chapter 1, so I really hope it encourages you. So, the context of this story is that the people of Israel were in exile. They had chosen for generations to choose their will over God's will, sin over what God called good, and idols over the one true king. And that led them to a place where they were actually in exile under the leadership of a dictator named King Nebuchadnezzar. While King Nebuchadnezzar was in leadership, he decided he wanted to expand his service of people. So he called for a young group of men from the Israelite community to be rounded up, and he basically was putting them through what I would call a 3-year boot camp. He wanted them to learn a specific language, act a specific way, and he even had specific foods he wanted them to eat. Now, the thing with the people of Israel is before they even went into exile, they would have known that God wanted them to act a specific way, all the way down to even having specific foods that God wanted them to eat and not to eat. So, while in exile, a lot of these guys that King Nebuchadnezzar was trying to train up to work in his service, they just submitted to the food that he gave them, even though they knew it went against what God had for them. But Daniel, he acted differently. He knew what God said was better, and he simply chose not to eat the food. This is where I want to go into our key verse for this devotional, which is Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. It says this: But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked his chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. The cool part about this story is that it goes on to show how Daniel didn't just eat different food than his peers. It actually showed us that he ended up being stronger, wiser, and more capable than anybody else that ate the king's food. Daniel knew that God's way was better. So all this leads me to some questions for us. First, do you genuinely believe that God's way is better? If you answered yes to that, my second question is, does what you are consuming in your life prove that? And if it's not clear, I'm not talking about food anymore. I mean, do your actions, your choices, what you watch, and how you spend your time reflect the same level of resolve for God's will that Daniel had? The reality is that in our culture today, access to sin is actually pretty high. Unfortunately, it's easy to choose the way of the world over the way of God. Maybe for you, that looks like scrolling on social media until you find yourself falling into sexual sin. Or maybe it's being able to binge watch all 5 seasons of Stranger Things, but not being able to open up and read your Bible. Or maybe it's choosing to live in loneliness instead of seeking out godly community. What is hard is that access to sin is pretty easy to get into, but the good news is, and where I find hope, is that if you just seek it out, God will always give you a pathway to righteousness. It is truly my prayer that this week we will seek the Lord in choosing his way over the way of the world, and that we can slowly with time become men that have that same level of resolve that Daniel had. Ask God to search your heart and reveal to you the things that you need to start saying no to and the things that we need to start saying yes to. God help us be men of godly resolve. I love y'all. Peace.